In the year 1935, Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act into law, and in 1936, the first Social Security numbers started being issued. But the first gentleman to actually receive a Social Security number, despite paying into that system for subsequent decades, never actually got to claim a single dollar of his Social Security benefit. Why? Because at the age of 61, he passed away just before he would have been able to claim that benefit at age 62. And in today's Financial Prof video, we're going to talk about how not only you can avoid a similar fate, but also maximize your Social Security benefit. Hi, I'm John Norberg, and welcome to the Financial Prof series. Alright, 3 major tips on how you can maximize your Social Security benefit. Now, this video is geared more towards the entrepreneur, but these tips can also potentially be applied, especially if you have a side gig, or maybe even just in general if you're somebody who's looking to get the most out of Social Security by learning a little bit more about how it works. And in fact, tip number 1 is understand how Social Security functions. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, first, it's important to understand that Social Security taxes 12.4% of your income, and there's an additional 2.9% that is taxed by Medicare. Now, that 12.4% is only on the first $176,100 of your earned income. But that 2.9% for Social Security or for Medicare is going to be on all of your income. So you could earn $20 million, let's just say, in a year, and you're still going to pay 2.9% of that entire amount to Medicare for that benefit that you may receive in later years. Now, if you're an employee, you're only going to pay half of that amount. So instead of 12.4, you'd be paying 6.2. Instead of 2.9% for Medicare, you'd be paying 1.45. But as entrepreneurs, we know that we're going to end up paying that full amount because we're paying both the employer side and the employee side, right? And while it can be tempting to reduce your income by filing every single tax deduction under the sun, many of which, by the way, we've talked about on this channel in other videos, so go check that out. It's important to understand where those tax benefits may start to cut into your potential Social Security benefit down the line. So that's why it's important to understand that you are earning that Social Security max and potentially paying in or getting credit for that maximum benefit down the road, as long as you're paying this year $176,100 of earned income worth of Social Security contributions. In other words, 12.4% of that amount. Working with a good CPA and a good financial advisor, ideally you can come to some understanding and balance of, hey, how much do I actually want Social Security to, quote unquote, be aware of, in other words, tax based on what I'm earning in salary, and what amount do I maybe want to consider taking in another form, such as dividends, etc. If you're an S Corp, you probably have a little bit more flexibility on that, right? All right, so again, tip number 1, understand how Social Security functions. Tip number 2, work a full 35 years. If at all possible, you're going to want to try to work at least 35 years, getting some kind of income out of that. Maybe you're a doctor who owns a clinic, or a high-powered attorney who owns their own multi-office firm. That's fantastic. But if you're considering maybe stepping back before you have a full 30 years of work history because, maybe you spent the first several years of your adult life in school to obtain that degree, then it's important to understand that Social Security looks at the average of 35 years, indexed for inflation, of course, and uses that to calculate what your actual benefit is going to be when you do start claiming. So if you've got, say, 30 years of working history, and then you need to fill out the last 5, what you can possibly consider doing is working in a part-time capacity for your business, or perhaps picking up a hobby job. Even if it only pays $1,000 or $2 per month, that can still substantially impact your overall benefit down the road when you do start claiming. And the reason for that is that Social Security weights those first dollars that you earn far more heavily than the top dollars. What do I mean by that? Quick example. The actual calculation, again, this is in 2025, is that Social Security will calculate the sum of 90% of the first $1,226 of your average indexed monthly earnings, then 32% of the next indexed monthly earnings over $1,226 through $7,391, and then 15% of your average index monthly earnings over the amount of $7,391. So you can see how even if your part-time job in semi-retirement is only able to earn, like I said, $1,000 or $2 per month, you're still going to get some decent impact on your overall Social Security benefit, allowing you to get that much more out of that system that you spent so many years paying into, right? So again, tip number 2, if at all possible, even if it's on a part-time basis, work a full 35 years. All right. Tip number 3, don't try to game the system. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of what I mean by this that unfortunately are a little too common, right? And the first one is a mistake we see where somebody's trying to game the system. Let's just say Joe, business owner, has run a successful business for the last 30-odd years, and he's got his 35 years of working history in, much of it earning at or above that full Social Security salary, which again, we clarified this year was $176.1K. Now that he's done that, again, he's in his mid-50s, he's got a spouse, and maybe that spouse has little to no working history because they stayed home and did the invaluable work of raising the children and running the home, right? If Joe, business owner, as I've sometimes seen, decides, hey, you know what? I want to recognize that contribution by switching my salary over to my spouse. I'm going to take a nominal salary now, maybe $20,000 or so. And the spouse is going to have that great big salary so that they can establish their own Social Security record independent of me so that they can have their own claiming track record. What ends up happening is that they end up paying far more into the Social Security system in taxes over that next 10, 15 years or so until they reach full retirement age than they typically end up getting back from it. And I've seen these calculations run 6 ways from Sunday because the spousal benefit works the way it does, where you get 50% of the higher earning spouse's benefit, and because of the amount that you're typically going to end up paying into Social Security anyway over those additional years by switching over to the spouse to that higher salary, you're not typically, again, there are always exceptions to every rule, going to out-earn on that independent Social Security track record what you would otherwise have received by getting that amount back by just simply continuing to maintain the higher earning spouse's salary as is, and then allowing that lower earning or non-earning spouse to collect that 50% benefit. The other way that I've seen people try to game the system, as it were, is as a business owner, you might decide, you know what, I put in my 30-some years, I'm going to retire as soon as I can claim Social Security. Retire, right? So what they'll do is they'll quote-unquote retire, tell Social Security, yeah, I'm not retired, I'm 62, so you don't need to worry about dinging my benefits, because remember, they're going to take $1 away for every $2 of earned income over the amount of $23,400 in 2025. And what they'll do is shift that earnings from salary over to another form, like dividends, or maybe again they'll shift it to a spouse, or maybe they'll be paid through some sort of large unexplained expenses, right? Social Security is wise to this, and they take a really close look at instances where any of those factors are in play, especially as a business owner. So if you're a business owner, do try to abide by the rules and the spirit, not just the letter of the law, because what can happen is Social Security might ask in that case for business tax returns, stock transfer agreements, special attentions where your is paid to where you're compensated through, again, sort of these esoteric or non-traditional ways when that wasn't the case before, all with an eye towards trying to get your salary below that $23,400 so you can collect Social Security, but still getting some form of compensation from the business such that your overall compensation maintains roughly at the same level. So again, tip number 3, when you understand the system, also understand that it's usually a bad idea to game that system. Because what can happen is Social Security, if they find out that you've been defrauding them, is come back and do a clawback where any amounts that you've collected are potentially up for grabs, and you're going to have to pay that back to Social Security, right? So if you're a business owner or just someone who really wants to make sure that they're getting the max out of that Social Security system, maybe you're getting ready to claim, maybe claiming is a long ways off yet, but you want to make sure that you're in the right track to get that back because you've been paying in, give us a call, drop us a line. In the meantime, we'll see you out there.